which is a presentation from Eden Housing. Go ahead, Carrie, would you like to introduce us to this?
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Chair Fritz. So this is the last in our, I'm calling it our spring lecture series or presentation series on different types and ideas surrounding housing development, specifically affordable housing development. And we have with us Susie, and Susie, I'm not even going to try to say your last name if you don't mind. Thank you. From Eden Housing, she's the Director of Real Estate Development, and Nick Stewart, who is also with Eden and is also a Sebastopol resident. And I will just kick it over to the two of you, and thank you, but not before saying thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. We really do appreciate it, and I know I've gotten several positive comments from community members about our presentation. So again, thank you.
So if I may, I will be happy to get started. My name is Nick Randall. 26 years ago, my family and I came up from the East Bay looking for a Christmas tree in Sebastopol, and we found one, but we also found a place to live. So we've been living on Burnside Road ever since, and my three kids graduated from Annalee, and I serve as a Rotarian in the community, so I feel quite connected to Sebastopol, even though we don't physically live within the city boundaries. I've also served for the last 36 years on the board of directors of Eden Housing. We are Hayward based, but we operate in the entire state of California. We're a nonprofit 501c3, and we've had a successful career for the last 52 years of developing, managing, and providing services to low-income people in affordable housing across the state. We currently have 165 properties which we own and operate in 15 counties and 50 cities in the state. And we just completed our strategic planning process to double the size of our organization and the size of the number of people that we serve over the next 10 years. We have 11,000 units which we own and operate, and we currently are housing 25,000, or actually more than 25,000 low and moderate income individuals. We are a full service company. We do development work, which you're going to hear a lot about from Chrissy. We then manage the properties which we own, and we provide services to our residents. Depending on the property, the services may vary from educational services, bridging the digital divide through communication and technology training, financial literacy and financial training. We provide scholarships. This year we'll give away about $100,000 to residents in our properties for higher education. And we've been doing this for more than 30 years. The next slide shows the counties that we're currently operating in. Primarily, we started in the East Bay, and we have the majority of our properties in the Bay Area, but we also are in the Central Valley, down into the Central Coast, and in Southern California in Los Angeles, Orange, and San Diego County. We provide housing primarily to families and seniors, but we also have special purpose properties for veterans, for disabled individuals, permanent supportive housing for people that are trying to get homes, get off the street. And we believe not only in providing temporary homes for people, we want to provide permanent life changes for individuals. And so we provide heavily services for their PSH properties that we have and units that we have. Here in Sonoma County, we have a couple of properties. We have about almost 1,000 units here. Foss Creek in Heelsburg was built in 2010. 64 units for families, including 10 for special needs. We are currently building under construction another property in Heelsburg in the Mill District redevelopment area. That'll be 41 units. And we have property in a couple of properties in Santa Rosa, Quail Run, which is 200 units for families. And Del Nido, which is approximately the same number of units on the northern side of town. And both properties are in the process of, these are not ones that we built, but we acquired them and we are rehabilitating them to bring them up to more modern standards and codes. In Petaluma, we actually have 3 properties, Washington Creek, the Downtown River, and Corona Ranch. And that, I guess, in total is about, it's about 1,000 units. So that's some of the history of Eden and who we are as a company, what we do. And I think that your primary interest is in the process that we follow with local jurisdictions to be able to generate these residences. And I'll turn you over to our expert, Chrissy, to lead you through the next slides.
So when I was talking with Carrie, we kind of we settled on the topic of what we've seen other cities do to help incentivize or encourage affordable housing development. In our 52-year history, we've worked with a lot of different cities and seen a lot of different types of partnerships. But I do want to emphasize from the get-go that every project we've done is in some way a partnership with the city that it's in or the jurisdiction that it's in. Whether it's that they come to us for a project or we work with them through the financing of it. Certainly we work with them to get it entitled, but it's often a lot more than that as well. The partnership does run quite a bit deeper. So, you know, I call this part of the presentation kind of like a toolkit for encouraging development, affordable housing development, because as a city, there are different types of tools that are available. You know, the best one can depend on what site it is, certainly on the characteristics of the city and the type of affordable development that you're looking for. So when we start looking at, or when we start a project, or start even thinking about our project, some of the first questions that we ask ourselves are, do we have somewhere to build it? So, you know, do we have a land to, obviously we need land, somewhere to site the project. Will we have enough money to build it? So it's not enough to just have the land and to have a great spot for affordable housing. These days per unit costs maybe in the $600,000 range. So that's per unit. And while a lot of money does come from the state and federal government, a lot of times we need to look outside of those sources to make sure we have enough funding to build the project. And a lot of that is based off of the jurisdiction that it's in and what kind of resources are available locally. And then can we develop it on a reasonable time frame? So it's not enough to just have the land, not enough just to have the funding, but is it a reasonable project to undertake? While we have taken on projects that unexpectedly took maybe 10 or more years to develop, ideally they develop on a shorter time frame. And we do recognize that these projects are long-term projects. We usually see them in the more than like the 3 to 6 year range to get it developed and built from the very beginning of a project to lease up. And we think that, some of the best things that we're seeing cities do that we partner with are one, to provide land. Providing land is not only good for giving us a spot to build the housing, but it also can help us to reduce the amount of funds that we need to look elsewhere for to be able to pay for and build the project. The next one is providing funding. I know that you folks have an affordable housing fund, but we also can look to not only the city, but the county that it's in for funding. And then the state and federal government have various funds available. Off the top of my head, I think there are maybe 15 different sources that we commonly use. And each one of them have very specific requirements and specific goals in which we look at that to see how competitive we are for those funds, because a lot of different places want to be building affordable housing, and most often the funding is a competition to get. The third one are inclusionary housing policies. So that can be something like having a market rate developer who's interested in building a larger scale development, having them provide affordable housing as part of their development, or maybe some sort of development agreement where they have to contribute in some way. Maybe it's providing funding for a future affordable housing, or maybe it's carving off some land in their site for future development, things like that. And the last one that I'll dive into a little bit more are different types of incentives for affordable housing development. So that's a little bit of overview. I have one slide for each of these that I'm gonna go into a little bit more depth. So the first one is providing land. The idea is providing public land for public good, and designating city-owned land for development. We've seen different cities and even the state do land surveys of all the sites that are owned publicly, and seeing if any of those are good for residential development of a moderate to high density. It does help a lot with the financing to have a bit more density involved in the sites. The next thing that the next kind of sub-tool within providing land is if there is a market rate development happening in the city or in the area, working with that developer to see if they have any land that they can provide, whether that's on site, so as part of their larger development, or if they just happen to have another parcel within the city that they own that would be good for affordable development. That's another way that we see projects sprout. The third, this one we're doing a little bit less, but more often than we used to, which is developer-driven land purchase. So we might work with an agent or a broker to actually go ahead and purchase land and work on a new affordable housing development right then and there. We don't do this that often because we prefer to have the land available at a really reduced cost, preferably free, just to make the financing pencil. But every once in a while, in jurisdictions where there are a lot of affordable housing funds, and we know that there's a pretty robust and quick process to get the project built, we might actually go ahead and purchase the land. And here I just have a few criteria for what's considered a good site in our book. Different affordable housing developers have different types of niches, but for us, what we look for is a lot that's at least half an acre. And if not that, at maybe a couple of different sites that we call scattered sites. That's kind of a technical term within the affordable housing industry, but maybe a few different sites within a mile radius of one another where you can develop everything and get some economies of scale by developing them together, but they don't have to physically be physically joined lots, or a combination of the two, you know, maybe a half acre, a couple of half acre or larger sites. And the site does need to be purchased, and it's not available just through what the city might already own. We do look to see that there are city funds available to contribute toward the costs of the land. And then whatever size that lot is, we want it to be zoned for at least 40 or so units, or we have a pathway to build at least 40 or so units. 40 is our minimum in terms of getting those economies of scale. Every once in a while, we'll do a smaller development, maybe as small as 20, 25, but those are pretty rare circumstances. And that would be if there are just other factors at play. Here I have two examples of projects we're working on. The Mill District project that Nick mentioned in Heelsburg. This is a project that's currently under construction. We actually just started a few weeks ago. This is a partnership with a market rate developer where they secured land in the downtown or quite near the downtown area. The city require them to provide some affordable housing as part of their development. And so they carved off a piece of their site. They found an affordable housing developer, us, to partner with. And so they're going forward building their market rate housing, very fancy condos, as well as some hotel or a hotel. And we're building the affordable portion to satisfy the city's requirements. And then the project that you see below that, Hana Gardens, that's in the city of El Cerrito. This is right next to their city hall. There was a vacant, actually not a vacant lot, there was an underdeveloped, underutilized site right next to their city hall that they owned, and they did an RFP, selected us as the nonprofit developer, and we developed a 63-unit senior apartment complex. So the next tool is, I mean, these might seem pretty obvious, but I'm hoping I can go into a little bit more depth that hopefully it's useful to you all. The next tool is providing the affordable housing funding. And I just want to point out that all the different funding sources that are necessary to develop a project. You need a loan from the mortgage lender, equity from a tax credit investor, then various grants and loans to fill the gap. And I have a graphic on the right-hand side. This is a project that we have in Heelsburg, Foss Creek Court, and I'll get into that a little bit more later as a little bit of a case study. But this project had, let's see, 5 different sources of funding, and the first 2, that top blue bar and that large yellow bar, those came as kind of de facto. Like we start looking at the financing of a project, and we know that maybe half of the cost of the project we can get pretty easily through a combination of tax credit equity and a conventional mortgage. But filling in the gap, so paying for the rest of it, that's where the local sources, city or county, and then and state sources as well. That's where we need those sources to come in to be able to afford to build the project. How we've seen cities generate affordable housing funds come from really 3 main sources: inclusionary in lieu fees. So if you have a market rate developer building market rate housing, instead of requiring that they build affordable housing on site, maybe integrated within their units, and instead they can pay an in lieu fee. And we've seen cities gather all of those funds up into a sort of trust fund that they put into a project or two. We also see commercial linkage fees. I admit this is probably a little bit more relevant in really office heavy environments. I have a graphic to the right there on the different types of commercial linkage fees, CLF, in Santa Clara County, but there's obviously a lot of office space going in that county, but you can see how it varies across the different cities. The idea being that when there's new development, office, retail, hotel, or industrial, that there are other needs necessary, or there are other needs being created in terms of needing to expand or create new public facilities to satisfy the needs of that development. So those are things like parks, schools, libraries, streets, and affordable housing, we think, is one of those types of like infrastructure type things that are necessary when new development sprouts up.
And Susie, sorry, Susie, are you able to make that graphic a little bit bigger? We can't quite see the charts and the numbers because of the screen setup.
I don't think I can because it's already fully on my screen, but I did send, I wonder if maybe at the end of the presentation, I can try to zoom in on.
Okay, great.
That's okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Just as a point of reference, this graphic on the bottom, the commercial linkage fees, it shows that the dollar amounts are like around $20 or so per square foot of office space. Okay, and then the last source that we see cities use are passing affordable housing bonds. I wouldn't expect a city like Sebastopol with its size to pass a bond, but maybe joining forces with the other cities and passing one at the county level. I know that there was an effort not too long ago for the county to pass an affordable housing bond. Okay, the third tool out of the four are inclusionary housing policies. And we see different types of policies, and in general, offering alternatives, I think, is preferable to just requiring or just having one or even two, just because every site is different. Market rate developers, which are really the source of making affordable housing happen here, they have all different types of scenarios that they can run, and they can find the best one for them. And it would still yield the same thing at the end of the day in terms of affordable housing, which is just more affordable housing units built. So some of the alternatives we've seen are the payment of in lieu fees, which I already mentioned, having market rate developers contribute gap financing directly to the affordable housing project. So instead of having the city be a pass-through for different funds for affordable housing, they can kind of partner directly with the affordable housing project at the encouragement of the city. The market rate developers can provide on-site affordable housing through these policies as required by the city, or off-site. So again, if they have a parcel that is not adjacent to their property, but somewhere else in the city, that would be a good site for affordable housing. Perhaps they would contribute that land for future affordable housing development. This picture here on the right is what we call Winery Place. It's in the city of Hayward. It's actually right next to our corporate office. This site is about a ½ acre, and we got it to develop through a deal that the city brokered with a market rate developer. They were building a pretty large development about, I don't know, 8 blocks away or so. And instead of integrating affordable units within their home ownership development. Instead, they own this site near downtown Hayward, and they provided this site to the city so that it could be used for affordable housing in the future. It actually worked out great, and because this site is even better for affordable housing than the site that they ended up developing into homeownership units. It's closer to the transit station. It's close to City Hall, near lots of different amenities that we think would be great for seniors, especially those who might not drive. And then this is my last one, incentives for affordable developments. Different policies that could be passed to encourage affordable housing development. So maybe expedited timelines for entitlements, allowing higher densities and parking reductions beyond what the state law requires. And that just helps make things pencil. The more efficiencies that can be incorporated into the development, the easier and faster it is to get it actually built. And then we've also seen cities have policies to expedite plan check reviews for affordable developments or waive or reduce different impact or building fees associated with that. Here is a project that we have not started building yet, but hope to start building next year in the city of San Rafael. It's our Whistle Stop Healthy Aging Campus. There are 2 stories of senior center on the bottom 2 stories, and then 4 stories of affordable senior homes above. And while this project took way longer to entitle than we might have hoped, at the end of the day, we did get higher densities than would have been required of the city from the state law. And they are waiving or reducing several fees, including plan check fees and building permit fees. And then finally here, I just have 2 more slides on our Cross Creek Court Apartments project in Heelsburg. This is a really nice project at a little bit more of like the suburban scale. It's a combination of I believe it's 11 buildings, in which 64 apartments are housed. It's across 3 acres of land in downtown Heelsburg. It includes a combination of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units in these like 2- and 3-story buildings. The development targets households earning 30 to 50% of the area median income for Sonoma County. We really wanted it to have kind of a family-oriented feel. So there's a community room, there are play structures, and in addition to that, we have a few of the units set aside for people transitioning out of homelessness or have some sort of special needs, so that we can provide some housing for that population as well. It is a relatively low percentage though, because we wanted to make sure it had a nice integrated feel throughout the development. And what the city of Heelsburg did to help incentivize this project to happen, first they had a RFP. They identified this site as one that they'd like for affordable housing. They send out a request for proposals to 3 different affordable housing nonprofits. Those nonprofits submitted proposals back with a vision for what they could do with the site. Eden Housing was selected of those from the proposals, and we worked hand in hand with the city to come up with a design and a project that they're happy to have in their city. And this is the financing. I hope that you can see this a little bit better. We have a conventional mortgage of just about $1 million. This is what the rents that tenants pay can get used to pay off in a 30-year mortgage. This is real hard debt. So we have actual payments we need to make every month to stay in the clear on that mortgage. Then we have about 17 million in low-income housing tax credit equity. The project kind of like automatically qualifies for this. While we do have to make sure we're competitive, once we do know that we are, we know we can get this equity into the deal. And then the next three sources are more local sources. The Federal Home Loan Bank, I'm sorry, that's not really a local source, but it is through the San Francisco Federal Home Loan Bank of about $400,000. And then the city contributed 3.4 million of redevelopment funds. And the value of the land that the city provided, again, it was more than 3 acres, was about $3.2 million. That's how we made the project pencil. And that's all I have for our set presentation. Nick and I are happy to answer any questions. I realize that a lot of the work that we do are in more slightly more urban areas, but I hope that doesn't discourage you all from looking into having more affordable housing developments in the city.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Do any commissioners have any questions they'd like to pose?
One brief question. You talked about a short-ish timeline. How would you define a timeline? I mean, I believe something like the Foss Creek's probably taken a good number of years to advance, but what are you finding your entitlement timelines are for affordable housing, and do you find them to be less or more than the market rate contractor might experience?
We have several projects in our pipeline right now, and what we are typically seeing is maybe a year or so to get through the entitlements process. We do have some more tools these days to expedite that just came down from the state, but ideally the entitlements process lasts about a year. And then it'll take at least a year and a half to pull the financing together, just because there are different financing competition rounds through the state where we have to go to get our gap financing and get our tax credits. Some of those might only be once a year, maybe twice a year, and we have to hit those. Sometimes we have to get the funding sequentially instead of all at once. So because of that, it'll take at least a year and a half, but sometimes longer than that, sometimes closer to 2, 3, 4 years. And then to actually build the project, and then I'll take about 6 months to get all of our paperwork together, work with a team of lawyers, our attorneys, as well as our lender's attorneys, the city's attorneys, to get everything ready to start construction. Construction will take about anywhere from 15 to 20 months, depending on the size of the project. And all of that together will be around 4 years. And that's, if a lot goes according to plan. If there are any snafus along the way, it could extend, I don't know, indefinitely, I guess, beyond that. But we'll be happy with when a project from start to finish takes 4 years.
Anyone else have any questions or of the presenters? I'd like to ask a couple questions. So you mentioned, a minimum kind of lot size you like to work with, and project size of at least 40 units. What development densities do you like? Do you have like a minimum, like when you're looking for a property, you want to see like it allows at least 15 units an acre or 25 units? Like, do you have like a minimum kind of density that you look for in projects? You're muted.
Muted.
Not so much a minimum density, more so just total number of units we can get onto the site. So And with that, I will say that I don't know if we've really ever built anything lower than 2 stories tall. And really these days we're in more of the 4 to 5 story range. But yeah, so it's really about how many units we can fit so that we get those economies of scale to make sure that all of the soft costs involved, all of those transaction costs are worthwhile.
And some of those projects you mentioned, like the Heelsburg project, where a developer donated land, either adjacent to or kind of remote from the project. When cities do that, is there ever concern, or does it happen that the developer donates the land to you, and then the affordable housing doesn't ever get built, or takes a much longer time than the market rate, or the market rate project could be open and it could be another 5 years before the affordable project is open? Has that ever become an issue or a concern?
That's definitely an issue that comes up, but there are protections that the city can put into place. First, they can, we've seen cities get involved in the agreement. So if the affordable project takes, extends beyond some set time frame, there could be some agreement where the land then has to transfer back to the city, and the city could decide if they want to start over or if they want to extend deadlines or that kind of thing. So the city does have some level of control there. The city can also require that the market rate units can't open. They can't get their certificate of occupancy until the affordable housing component does. We see that a lot of times, and that really encourages the market rate developer to make sure, so they've got skin in the game to make sure that the affordable housing component moves forward. So that might incentivize them to provide more gap financing into the project, make sure that the affordable housing pencils, or just provide a little bit more oversight so that the market rate component can hit their targets as well.
We did this recently in Fremont with a relatively large, actually a small series of projects, and our units had to be done before they could get certificates of occupancy on their units. So there was a lot of incentive for them to go forward.
And
right, and Paul, our inclusionary requirements are more or less written the same way, where you can't build the market rate and not do the inclusionary. They have to be done at the same time.
And that Fremont project, did they finish about the same time? Was the market rate developer waiting for you at all, or was it?
I don't think they. I don't remember exactly the details, but they were focused on making sure that we would get our piece done and open so that they could then finish theirs and start selling units. So it was, both sides were well served by an expeditious execution.
Yeah. Let's see.
And Paul, just so you know, Commissioner Linden and Commissioner Fernandez have their hands up too.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Luke, if you want to have a question.
Sure. Thank you so much, Susie and Nick, for the presentation. I wanted to follow up a little bit on Chair Fritz's question about how density can help, just with the context that our downtown has a height limit of 3 stories. And I'm just curious, how much of an advantage is there to kind of the comparative benefits of a 4-story or a 5-story height limit, just in terms of being able to get some of those larger lots? Most of our available vacant underutilized land is in our downtown. So if you could just detail that a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's really helpful to be able to fit more units onto the site, just to get those economies of scale, to be able to get to at least a minimum of 40 units per project. That being said, if the community is really opposed to to a taller building that can slow things down and potentially kill a project, and we wouldn't want that either. So we would also want to make sure that the community had buy-in to the higher height limits. So there are some ways that there are different strategies to employ so that projects can be designed so that they fit into the character of a place and maybe stretch the limits of what people are comfortable with without going beyond those limits. But 3 stories is pretty good for what we go for. If we could build a 4-story building and have the community be okay with that, that would really go a long way in making the project pencil better.
And I think
And-
architecturally, there are a number of things that we've had success with to lessen the impact of ultimately a slightly taller building. We've had difficulties with City of Palo Alto, for example, in their design review process, but we have found mitigating ways of moving things around on a site to lower the impact in the neighborhood successfully.
Absolutely, thank you. My
Right.
next question is, sorry. Okay, my next question was just, could you provide a little more detail just on how land donation can help fill out the capital stack for getting these projects financed? Because I know that some of the tax credits and other sources of funding have become increasingly competitive and overprescribed, and just wondering how land donation can help a project in determining readiness and viability for financing.
Yeah, in 2 main ways, really. The first is just, whatever we don't have to pay for, it's just however much, that's the amount that we don't have to go to other sources for. So we don't have to go to the state or get more tax credits to cover. So if the land is, I don't know, worth $1 million, it's just $1 million less of fundraising efforts that we have to put into place. But the other is that the more local funding that is in a project, the more competitive it is for state and federal sources.
Right.
And land donations count as like a dollar for dollar. They do count as local funding. So it can definitely be really helpful. And a lot of projects that we do, it's all that a city or a jurisdiction contributes, and because of other factors, because it's desirable in other ways that meet the goals of different state and federal programs, it is able to get financed and able to get built. So in jurisdictions where there might not be a lot of other local funds, it's a really great tool, and sometimes the only tool. And
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Luke?
No, that'll do it.
Everett, you had some questions?
Thank you. Susie and Nick, thank you for taking the time to present. And Nick, we appreciate you being in our community. And I guess the plan worked to lure you in with the Christmas tree. So that's great.
It worked.
With a lot of the companies abandoning worker facilities and more commercial buildings being available, is there any entity or any consideration or even financially feasible to convert some of those buildings or work on projects to convert those kind of buildings into living units?
The first one that comes to mind to me, and I'll let Susie jump in here, but Marin County has recently contacted us, or maybe it was the city of San Rafael, I'm not sure, regarding some commercial sites, or one in particular in San Rafael, that they would like us to explore converting to affordable housing. And we're not too far down the track with this yet, but it's obviously a trend it's going to be increasing, and I think that Eden has the bit between our teeth. We're going to figure out ways to make this work because it's going to be a source of future development. I am absolutely sure.
Yeah, right. There's a project we're working on in San Rafael. That's an old office building. There's another project in the city of Richmond where we are converting an old county health building into affordable housing. So
Right.
we determined that it's going to be more cost effective to do an adaptive reuse, so keep the structure and outfit it out on the interior rather than demolish and start anew. And that one's a really exciting project as well. So that's actually a really great point that I missed. I actually forgot about, which is that another way is not just providing a site like a vacant lot, but maybe a building that's underutilized or not being used, that's city or county owned. That can also be a great way to jumpstart a project.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. That sounds promising.
Any other questions from the commission?
I have a question, Linda Kelly here.
Go ahead, Linda.
Prevailing wage, how does that really work? I know so many times prevailing wage is, I'm sure, required under certain lenders, but often it seems like it's not local jobs that are being created and the construction crews are coming from out the area. Not that they don't need jobs too, but could you illuminate us a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So I'd say maybe 80, even 90% of our projects do pay prevailing wages, and we do that as to satisfy some sort of requirement, whether it's coming from the city, from well, really it'd be coming from one of our funding sources. The tax credit program doesn't require it, but almost every other funding source that we use requires it. And the way that it gets implemented is we hire a general contractor. In getting the general contractor, we put out a bid where we share our architectural plans, and we ask the general contractors to price everything out. And we might get a handful of bids, and we'll usually select the one that comes in the lowest, just because we're always kind of just scraping by to make these projects work financially. And while we're picking the lowest bids, they're also picking the lowest bids for their subcontractors. So for their plumbers, electricians, their cleaning crews, they have maybe 30 different subcontractors that they hire for each job. And for each trade, or each subcontractor trade, they're getting a few different bids, and they're also selecting the lowest one. So it's all a matter of trying to just get the lowest cost possible to make the most efficient use of these public resources. And because of that, sometimes the crews are indeed coming from farther away. We don't really have a say in where they're based, and ideally they're local. Certainly we can ask that the contractors reach out to local firms, but in terms of who's actually bidding the lowest, that's a little bit out of our hands. And that's what's driving who's actually working on the sites.
I had some work, some rehab work done in my house the last couple of years, and the contractors were actually driving here every day from Sacramento. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And anyone else have any other questions? I had just a couple other more questions. we've had several presentations now by affordable housing developers. I don't think anyone has brought up density bonuses. So I wonder if you could sort of talk about that a little bit. And do you typically get density bonuses on your project? Does that help, kind of, get the numbers up to the 40 plus, and just sort of explain that a little bit, or how do you use that?
Yeah, definitely. We are using density bonuses quite often in our projects. And that's usually what helps get us over that minimum threshold. The state passed a density bonus law several years ago, and they've continued to refine it over time, where affordable housing development, the latest iteration has it such that if you have a development that's where all the units are affordable housing, then I think you get a 100% density bonus. So if the site is zoned for, I don't know, 20 dwelling units per acre, then now it's 40 dwelling units per acre. And along with that density bonus, that law also, depending on what you qualify for, might give you, oh yes, it'll give you what they call incentives, 3 incentives or 4 incentives, where the project does not have to abide by the local zoning code to make it work, to make the density that's provided by the law feasible. So if you qualify for now 40 units per acre instead of 20 units an acre, and the only way to make that work is to add a story or to make the units a smaller size than might be required, then those are things that are allowed through the law. We certainly work with jurisdictions to make sure we're building something that they want to have in their community, but it does help in providing a little bit of cover for jurisdictions where people might be afraid of just having change or having development, and getting the affordable housing to actually get built in that community where it might not have been financially feasible without it.
So kind of going back to Luke's earlier question about height, you could use a density bonus project. We get a concession that you could say we need this extra story to get the number of units that we need to make this work, and that would be a way to help you get that, around some of those restrictions that some cities put in place.
Yes, exactly.
And I will clarify, I think we do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, but I think downtown we do allow 4 stories if it's a residential project.
Yes, I was going to mention that earlier. I didn't want to interrupt, but yes, if it is residential, it's 4 stories instead of 3, and then in our multifamily zones, instead of 2 stories, you can go 3. So we basically, for an affordable housing project, 100% affordable housing project, we give an extra story.
And then my last question is, do you see other, here, I'm an architect and I do affordable housing and multifamily housing, and I attend webinars and read things about, some cities starting to loosen up some of their kind of, zoning requirements, particularly around affordable housing, and then trying to make housing more of a by right use and more areas, I guess, and more sites. Do you see that? Do you see that in other cities? Have you seen people starting to do things like that? And is that a trend you think is moving forward?
I've seen some cities plan for affordable housing by providing some of the incentives that I mentioned, like if you're affordable housing, like specifically delineating the types of concessions and additional densities. I haven't seen so much of actually of cities actually like fighting affordable housing through their planning process. throughout the city. I know that the city of Palo Alto is starting to talk about affordable housing overlays. So they're planning for affordable housing in certain areas, but I actually don't know too much of the details on that. But there are different planning tools, like city planning tools, that cities have used, but I admit I haven't done a project that took advantage of one of them.
Right, and Chair Fritz, I can maybe add on to that, your question a little bit. So one of the things that's happening with the housing element requirements and review by HCD to certify those is they have tightened the regulations on what you can count as a site towards your housing inventory. You have to, if it's smaller than a half acre, as Susie noted, the half acre plus is sort of the right size for this type of project. But if you have sites less than half acre or larger than 10 acres, you have to provide some analysis that it is actually a viable site. But additionally, they have tightened any sites that are already that have an existing development, so it's not a vacant lot. There are certain restrictions and requirements, and one of the things to be able to reuse a site that you've already identified that has something on it, you have to actually have it zoned by right. It can't be a conditional use permit because of the number of barriers to that. And so, what Sebastopol did in 2018 was really positioned a lot of the things well. Like we allow residential in downtown if it's not on the first story without a conditional use permit. So for 100% residential, we still require use permit. Obviously, there's interplay with the businesses and business support. But those types of things, I think you'll see cities do more and more, especially in this next upcoming housing element for those who haven't already done it. I think Sebastopol's actually done, from what I've seen from other jurisdictions, a pretty good job. What Kenyon and De Novo Group did in the last round, housing element and zoning.
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions from commissioners, I will open this up for public comment. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, you can either raise your virtual hand or turn on your screen and raise your actual hand and you can make your comment.
All right. And I think we have a question from Tor Allen.
Yeah, hey, sorry I checked in late, but I just wanted to ask if you've considered all electric net zero design strategies in your developments of late. I've noticed that other affordable housing developers are doing so and discovering the economic benefits of doing that. Also, here in Sebastopol, we have a climate action resolution and goals towards reducing emissions. So I'm just curious about your experience with specifically all electric, no gas, net zero type of strategies in your current projects or upcoming projects.
We do have a few projects now in our pipeline that are either just starting construction or will be starting construction in the next year that are going to be all electric. It is a new foray for us. Where in the most recent past, like in the last at least 10 years or more, we would heat the water with gas, but pretty much not have gas used in any other way. And we would have the cooking done with electricity. But now we're looking into all electric. It doesn't require too much of a change. It requires maybe slightly larger electrical rooms, like utility spaces, slightly different equipment. But as an industry, we're getting a little bit better to understanding what it means to totally electrify, and we're actually starting to see it happen on our project. So we're doing a large scale rehab on a project in East Palo Alto, where everything's going to go all electric. We have a new construction building in the city of San Jose that's going to be all electric. And we're pretty excited about it too because of the good effect it'll have on the greenhouse gas emissions of the project.
Parenthetically, I just mentioned that Eden has been a national leader in essentially green building and green implementation of and management of affordable housing. We've had a green strategy, a robust green strategy for 30 years now. And I don't know what percentage of our properties are supported by solar, but it's a relatively high percentage. It's a constant. We actually have a whole department in the company devoted to the green initiative.
Thanks. A follow-up question to that. I gather so there's terminology when you say all electric, you could mean all the appliances. There's no gas feeding, but you may or may not have solar. And so the net zero implies that you have solar on site, and it also reduces resident bills. And so there's something to do with the equation that, well, if you're reducing their bill, electrical bills, utility bills, that their rents they can afford a little bit more on the rent side, and that helps you pencil out the economics of your project. Is that a factor or not really?
Well, the rents that we're charging are usually set by the state, and really they're set by HUD at the federal level, and they're kind of filtered through the state. So, having a more efficient building doesn't necessarily reduce the rents that our residents are paying. It's more that the project becomes more financially feasible so that it can actually exist in a way, because of the cost savings that come from the energy improvements or the lower operating costs. We charge rents based off of these set amounts that the state requires, and then we provide a utility allowance as well. So if the state says in this county for a 2-bedroom unit you can charge, I'm just going to throw a number out there, $1,500. We know that typical utilities might cost, say, $50 a month. So the rent that we actually charge will be $1,450 to that tenant.
Thank you. Any other of the members of the public wish to make a comment or ask a question?
Chair Fritz, I do have a question from Mr. Adams in the chat, so I'll just read it. This is a question about housing for the homeless. Nick indicated that you were in the process of strategic planning. California, including Sonoma County, has a crisis of homelessness, which has become a public health crisis. Most cities simply rent hotel rooms to address this problem, but that's expensive and not sustainable. What major innovations do you think will help solve this permanent housing for the homeless problem in a systemic way, such as overcoming the high cost of labor, land, and materials, as well as time to build, permitting, zoning, etc.?
Yeah, Eden is focused on longer-term solutions to homelessness as opposed to short-term and temporary fixes. We do have properties that have a certain number of units designated for one program or another related to homelessness. And I think within our portfolio, Susie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the number of units specifically targeting the homeless is someplace in the neighborhood of 700 or 800 across the portfolio. I don't remember the number. It's always going up. In am I wrong that in the Mill District project in Heelsburg, there's a set aside of 10 units for homeless? Eden's answer, Eden's piece of the overall answer to homelessness is the housing first approach, which says you get people off the street with an address in a permanent supportive housing unit where they can receive services and have a sense of place and home for the long term, and in this process then graduate back into society as a whole. We're not in the business of doing temporary housing, except in extreme cases where we've sort of been backed into it.
Great, thank you. See anything else, Carrie?
Hold on. Nope, I don't see any other public questions or comments.
All right, then I will close public comments. And any commissioners have any final thoughts or questions? Well, great. Well, thanks so much for being here, Susie and Nick. It's been very informative. And I think I really appreciate your time. And hopefully, we'll see an Eden Housing project in Sebastopol someday.
We'd love to work with you.
Thank you
I'm
so
sure
much
you'd like
for
to
your
have
time.
something close to home, Nick.